Aloha!
Hey guys,
I'm Paulina.
I'm Mike.
We're OffGridHawaii, and Happy New Year! New year, new us. Just kidding, same old us, but we're here with a new video. So new year, new video. This video is going to be about what we said we would make a video about in our previous video, which is basically starting out a brand new fruit orchard / fruit forest here in Upper Puna. So this video is going to cover Michael's new project at his friend's Rose's property, and we are going to address all the comments and questions that you guys posted about in that other video that you guys wanted us to answer about planting a new fruit orchard.
So the first thing I want to address is that every place in Upper Puna is different. So the things that we've done to modify the land here, you may not have to do in other places. So everything we talk about is specific to Rose's property, but also can apply to other places if they have the same thing going on. Okay, so before we get into anything else, I want to bring up the state of the property when I first found it. The previous owner had done a little bit of clearing here with a tractor and kind of disguised it in a way where we weren't sure how much mud was here. This is an area where there is actually a lot of soil. It's not very good, but there's a lot of it here, and he would fill in holes with it, and it kind of looked flat, but it really wasn't. And when it rains, all those spots that he had filled in were getting so muddy that the first time I came here with my truck, I almost got stuck, but good thing I had four-wheel drive. I had to put it in four-wheel drive low to get out of some of these spots. So just to give you an idea, it was very muddy here, and there's very little drainage, and it's very bumpy. The reason that it's bumpy here is because when lava flows across land, it doesn't just go flat. You know, in some places it does, but most places there's dips and valleys and cracks and stuff, and you really never know what you're going to find here. And it's a lot of time it's so grown over that there's no way you can tell what's under the surface of all the vegetation. So to tell you a little bit about what Rose wanted, she envisions herself living here and growing her own food and having a nice off-grid setup and stuff. So she plans on being here sometime next year, but she wants the plants to have a little bit of a head start before she gets here, which is a good idea because some of these plants take a long time to produce fruit. So she had me come here and inspect and see what I thought of like how to approach this and what things we need to modify. So when I first got here, I realized that the driveway was in no shape for vehicles to come in and out and bring the supplies or do the work that they needed to. So we got a driveway installed, and while the driveway was being installed, we had to get a machine here, a D9, to rip some of this because the drainage was really bad. And ripping is a whole other question that I'm going to get into later in this video. If you don't know what it is, there's a lot of stuff you need to know about it. Anyway, basically the drainage here was horrible, so ripping it was kind of a necessity for how I wanted to map this out for her. I wanted to make it nice and flat and easy to maintain for her, because if you can't maintain the trees, then they're going to be neglected, and if it's too much work, you know, you're going to wait longer and longer between feedings, and it may even, if you have somebody else do it, then it's going to cost more money for them to do it. So basically wanted to set it up to where it's easy to maintain and all the trees are in one area, which kind of worked out because this spot was already clear. We didn't have to take down any of the natural like forest to do so. So we're keeping a lot of the stuff that was here, the native species of ohia and uluhe. Really just that. There's a couple of invasives like some Waiwi and stuff. Yeah, so we want to keep a lot of the native trees because they're so beautiful, and these species are endemic to Hawaiian Islands, so they grow nowhere else on the planet. It's really cool to have them in your backyard, and it's special. So we only cleared the part, or ripped the part that was already cleared, and I have it almost planted fully now, and maybe a second stage of planting will go into the natural forest and find spots without taking out everything. So that'll be stage 2, but stage 1 was pretty much just ripping a half acre of land and planting 20 trees.
So one question that we got in the comments section of that previous video is by Roloff Horn. And his question is, would be great to know how you start planning out the orchard and what elements you consider landscape-wise when you're designing in the tropics / higher rainfall areas. Thanks!
So I guess the main part of the question was designing in terms of rainfall. There's a saying around here that goes, plant high, sure to thrive, plant low, sure to go. And what that means is, if you plant low, your plants might drown, your trees might drown in water, because if you have bad drainage, then they'll be underwater if you get a heavy rainstorm. And many of you guys know that live here, we got about 50 inches of rain in a week when we had that hurricane. So you guys know that it can rain a lot within a short period of time. It doesn't mean it's going to rain all year round, but we can have heavy rains for a long period of time, and we don't want our plants to be underwater. So we plant them high so that they're not sitting underwater. I didn't even dig a hole here, actually. We got it ripped about 2 feet. I've actually put another about 1.5 feet of soil in a mound, and that's what I planted in. So none of these trees actually went into the ground. They're all above ground, and then there's soil that we've added. At first glance, this soil may look pretty good, you know, it breaks apart nice. But once it's wet, it really holds moisture too well. So I'm going to be adding cinder to it, black cinder, and that should help with the drainage. A good test you can do with the soil is like when it's wet like this, make it into a ball, and if you could squish it and like kind of work it like clay, that's a sign that it's not going to drain well and roots aren't going to be able to like penetrate through. So it's not a big deal, you know. It's good that she has all this soil. All we have to do is mix it with cinder, and then she's going to have quite a bit. And that pile of cinder is huge. This pile of dirt is huge. Be sure to not cover the trunk with mulch. Keep it clear. Let it breathe around here. This is where the tree breathes. So this is how I'm planting the trees here, and every 2 months I'm going to come back, or if Rose is here and wants to do it, we're going to build the soil out. So this mound's just going to get wider and wider and wider as the tree grows big. So that the entire ground level here is going to raise up about 1.5 feet, the same as the mound was tall. So it's just a mound now, and the roots have plenty of room, you know, to grow for a while, but eventually they're going to want to keep spreading out. So that's why we're just going to build that out as we fertilize and mulch it every 2 months. And you could even add cinder soil around it, you know, for something a little more sturdy. It's a really good technique for in really wet climates like this. And especially because we only ripped 2 feet down, so it's good to go up another 1.5 feet, so that totals 3.5 feet, rather than, you know, planting it in the ground and then you only have 2 feet of soil where the roots can move around. This way it's good because we have that 2 feet that we ripped down, and then, you know, 1.5 feet up. So now it has almost double what it did. So that's one of the techniques we use to help the plants out in a high rainfall area. I think the other part of your question is maybe other things I consider when I'm maybe mapping them out and where am I going to put things. So what you want to do when thinking about placement for trees is you want to do a lot of research and figure out how big these trees are going to grow, because you don't want to put a a tree that's going to grow 30 feet 10 feet from a tree that's going to grow 30 feet. They're just going to grow into each other, and there's not going to be much airflow in between. So definitely figure out how big your trees are going to get. That way you can space them accordingly. You know, you want to do as little maintenance as possible. People say, oh, I'll just prune them to 10 feet wide, but you're going to be pruning them all the time. I think it's better to keep the right spacing and do less work. So also, while you're doing the research to find out how big these trees are, also find out what elevation they do well at. And they might not always be super accurate, so like see what your neighbors are growing and figure out if it's doing well for them. Maybe talk to people, like what grows good in this area. Some things like to grow closer to sea level, and some things do better higher up in elevation. So that's a good thing to consider. Especially here, because elevations change like crazy. There's, sea level to 14,000 feet. So nothing grows up there though. So also, because this place was completely ripped and there's absolutely no vegetation here now, another thing to consider is planting mulch crops. So what I've planted is some mulch crops and nitrogen fixing plants, ground covers to help establish that stuff, the plants that we want to grow, because when you have an open space like that, weed seeds will blow in and just like settle. So if you don't pick the things you want to grow here, nature's gonna pick it. So what I've planted here are some mulch crops, some taller ones, some bush type ones, some ground cover, and that's gonna help establish the plants that we want to grow here, the good ones, nitrogen fixers and mulch crops. So one thing a lot of people consider when you're trying to plant in a permaculture style is like stacking functions. So you want to fit trees in between trees and figure out which ones require more sun and which ones like shade actually. Some like shade or some do okay in shade. So, plant the ones that are going to require full sun somewhere where it's going to get full sun, and then maybe something that doesn't mind shade behind something that's going to shade it. So that's another thing you're going to have to do when you're doing your research. So one of the first things I do that I forgot to mention maybe is you look to see where the sun is rising and setting and which way is south, because that's the part that's going to be getting the most sun exposure when you're in northern hemisphere. So you want to figure out where south is and then maybe stack your plants that way. So the higher ones here, and then if it is another plant that's smaller that requires sun, in front of it. If it's one that requires shade, you want to put it behind that one. So stacking your trees in a way that fits them all together, sort of locks them in, is pretty cool. Also, a thing we have to consider is, I'm not going to show Rose's neighbor because she requested that I don't, but her lot is, there's nothing, no border here. So one of her main concerns was creating a border so that eventually someday she'll have privacy. It won't be for a while, but we've started bush type ones that are, they might not last long, but that's going to create the initial border. And then I've planted avocados, which you wouldn't think of as like a hedge or a border, but an avocado is a tree that's going to produce food, plus it's a tree that's going to live a long time, like over 100 years if it's treated right. So if the avocados are fed well and maintained good, they actually grow like a giant bush. So it'll be like this 30-foot tall bush, and the leaves actually come down to the ground, and so you can't even see through these. So it's 30 feet of privacy pretty much. And that might even block out things like sound. You might not be able to hear your neighbors as much. So this is a question from Jamie Fries. It was kind of, I think, a question about our land, but I'm going to tell you what I did here because it's kind of fitting. And the question was, how much soil did you start your cacao with? So I'm just going to tell you how much I started these with because it's kind of relevant. So actually the soil Rose had here, which I told you she had a lot, and it was not very good. So her soil has to be modified with adding like cinder for better drainage. She had a lot of mud here, so you need to add something like sand or cinder. It was really hard to mix because it was so wet for a while. It's actually very dry because we're in drought now, and it'll probably be easier to mix. But originally it was so muddy that I couldn't mix it with the cinder, and I was getting a little impatient, so I ordered some soil that was already mixed, and Ashley from Ashley's Tractor and Hauling brought it. If you guys are looking for soil that's just ready to go and you don't have to do anything, Ashley's Tractor and Hauling has great soil. And this is it right here. So what I'd like to start each tree with is a minimum of 5 wheelbarrows full of soil. And that's because I'm building a mound. I want it to taper off really slow. You don't want it just like a mound like this and then you know, very steep mound. You want it to like taper so it almost looks like it's ground level. This way it'll just keep a lot of moisture in there. I think if it was too small, the pile would dry out sooner, and in periods like drought like this, it might not do so good. I have a couple that I started early that have been in this drought longer, and I wasn't watering them because I mean, this is very rare that we're in a serious drought here. Like, I guess it does happen every once in a while. You could get a month of like no rain. So we lost a couple of leaves on some of the avocados. Looks like they're coming back now that I've been watering them. I've had to come here like every 4 or 5 days to water. I definitely don't recommend starting your orchard if you're in a drought because it just requires a lot more work. At least 5 wheelbarrows of soil, I think is good. Plus, I've been using 2 wheelbarrowfuls of mulch on top of that. So that'll help hold moisture in there for you.
All right, so one last question that we want to address. This one comes from Travis Britton. He asks, what brand of rice cooker did Becky get? LOL, I love you, you're so funny. So the brand of rice cooker is called the John Mulaney. Look it up and you might find out about what that is all about.
So guys, that's going to be it for this video. I don't want to make it super long, and I want to keep it open for discussion. I want you guys to ask questions, and we'll do updates, follow-ups of this one. We are actually going to go shoot another video right now, so you will possibly get
2 videos.
2 videos very closely back to back
within the same month,
rather than waiting a whole month. So that's pretty exciting. Paulina's off from work and we're doing more work for her.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.
See you guys.